Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the glorious mess of building brands, businesses, and a career you love with the people who've done it. I'm your host, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into today's story of starting over.
Welcome to another episode of Unemployed and Afraid Business Builders. Here is a fun fact that gets mentioned in today's episode that I wanted to chat a bit more about up front. Did you know that small businesses make up around 97% of the approximately 2.5 million businesses in Australia alone? That is so impressive. And remember that a small business, quote unquote, is considered such by the ATO if they have an annual turnover of less than 10 mil, regardless of if it's an individual, company, or trust, and have less than 20 employees. Small is huge, the literal motor room of our economy. So no matter where you might fall on that scale of small, a word that really feels like it needs a rebrand when talking about the sheer effort business takes and the scale of this sector. Maybe we'll do that in a later episode. I just hope that you're proud to be part of that world, and I hope that you keep going in it. This episode, as is every episode, is all about giving you the real, relatable, vulnerable experience of making small to medium businesses you love so that you're hyped to keep on smashing it. We're going to talk about the realities of stepping away from a long-held corporate career, in particular in a male-dominated environment, and the sneaky glory of a slow goodbye when doing so. When we touch on managing the finances of high net worth families, giving me big Succession vibes. God, I love that show. Studying for the sheer passion of it, whether for the first time or the fifth time at any damn age you like. And actually listening back, I realized it almost sounds like an ad for Monash Uni in that bit because I was frothing so much on the study chat. I promise you it's not. We talk about mitigating startup mode risk. There's some very valuable advice on that. And considering the legacy you might be able to leave with your work that you do, a particular area of interest for me and anyone else who may be living a life child-free. It's encouragement to lean into your core developed skills to bridge you into the new space that you want to be in while learning new skills along the way. And there is just so much goodness in the sharing of this incredible woman's story. I hope you absolutely love this chat with the lovely Narelle and keep on backing yourself on this small business journey. I'm here today with Narelle Wilson, founder of Volta Consulting, who help business owners bridge the gap between profit and purpose and improve the world one small business at a time. Until now, small business consulting services like Volta have focused on strategies to drive profit, but purpose, not so much. Volta offers new perspectives and practical strategies to build profitable small businesses that drive social change and positively impact the world. Think services like strategy, planning, operations, financial management, bookkeeping, and naturally, social impact. Small businesses make up 97% of the approximately 2.4 million businesses in Australia alone. And even if 50% of them choose to align profit with purpose and become more sustainable, the potential for social impact is massive. A carbon neutral business herself, I'm going to guess the road to finding this incredibly important niche is filled with learnings that I can't wait to hear about. Narelle, welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thanks for having me, Kim. I'm excited to be here.
It is such a cool business to research and investigate and such an important niche. So I just can't wait to hear all about your story. But before we do, I would love to know, how would your husband describe you?
Probably stubborn. I'm a dog with a bone. I don't let things go too easily. So I'll always rummage around and find the answer that I want. And loyal. I hope he says loyal anyway.
And now I'll lift the lid just a little bit on a further answer because, of course, we had a nice chat before we hit record. And I think he also said that you might have, what did he say, a mouth like a fisherman's wife?
I do have a tendency to swear when I get emotional, as they like to say. I like to use my hands and describe what I'm feeling. I don't have a filter sometimes.
A woman after my own heart. I'm right there with you. Before Volta Consulting, tell me, who were you?
I think back then I would have defined myself by my corporate role, be that good or bad. So I worked for a private equity firm managing a couple of high net worth families, investments basically. And to be honest, that was my life for 14 years. Way too much work, not enough fun.
What was your experience in the corporate world like on a day-to-day?
It could change on a day-to-day basis. So in the morning, it might be running smoothly. You might come up with a few hiccups. Very male-dominated. The industry I worked in was just a lot of men, particularly leadership positions, very limited in regards to women in the higher up in the chain. Challenging. I think when you work at a place for so long, you get that level of comfort that goes there. And some of the PAs that I had working for me over the years would just sit there and go, oh my God, I can't believe you and the boss actually speak like that to each other, because I could get very fiery and he knew how to push my buttons and I knew how to push his. So it was an interesting work relationship, challenging, but I learned so much. And it's funny, whenever I spoke to people, especially after I left, they always said in the 14 years, you would have taken you 5 or 6 job moves to learn what you learned in that amount of time, but I stayed in one spot. So I'm very fortunate in my experience.
I'm still a little hung up on managing the investments and finances for high net worth families. My mind is going back to Succession. No. I don't know if you've watched that show. Those who have will know it kind of feels like a really loose depiction of the Murdochs and in a corporate and family politics, and it's very entertaining to watch. So I certainly won't ask you any private questions about that whilst we're recording anyway, because I would really like to know. But I can imagine that that would be both confronting and overwhelming at times, being responsible for that.
It definitely was overwhelming. I've always taken the position when I work for someone that I treat it like my own. So when you're dealing with multi-millions, like there's lots of zeros on the bank account, lots of zeros on the investment, I always treated it like it was my own. So I think with that comes a lot of responsibility, and we do get overwhelmed at times. I remember working for this director for a couple of years, and he was building a rather expensive home at the time. And, you know, I'm an accountant. I use lots of spreadsheets, and I made an error on one formula that meant that I had miscalculated how much funds we would require to finish this build. And it was not a small error. It was a large amount of money, but I absolutely lost it. By the time my husband picked me up that night from work, I was in tears, sitting in the car going, oh my God, he's going to fire me because I've stuffed up this formula. My husband's just like, look, you're just going to have to tell him. I was like, okay, look, call him tonight. Get it off your chest so you don't go to bed with it hanging over you. And I did. I called him. He's one of those people that likes to process things. So he obviously slept on it overnight. We spoke about it in the morning. And he's like, yeah, you know what? You fucked it up, but you didn't actually cost me any money. It was just a miscalculation. So it's funny how you work things up in your mind and you automatically go to the worst case scenario when realistically it wasn't that bad. But you can make a bet that I checked every formula from there on in for the next 10 years that I worked for him.
Oh my goodness, that could have been very scary, I imagine, just thinking about the amount of zeros I'm sure that would have added up to in terms of a difference. And I don't blame you. We often learn our harshest lessons that carry us through to make sure that we don't ever make any kind of mistake even close to that. But gosh, I imagine that would have been a absolutely gut-wrenching phone call. So good advice from your husband. He's coming through with the goods on that one. So tell me what brought you to the end of your corporate life. And now this is quite a loaded question because, of course, I've had the pleasure of doing a little research on you and hearing a little bit about your story before we've hit record today. So I know that you had a step before the actual official step that never eventuated. So tell me about the slow decline, perhaps, of your corporate life.
I think it must have been around the 10-year mark where I really had been getting itchy feet. I had been thinking that this wasn't something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It wasn't fulfilling enough for me, and it was lining the pockets of a few individuals, which is fine, but it just wasn't me at my core. And things had been declining in the relationship with my boss at the time. due to various things. So I tried to resign after I came back from a Christmas break, and I had no job to go to or anything like that. It was like, you know what? I've had enough. I'm done. I need to get out. We spoke. We got the office manager up. We worked out a plan of attack, how we were going to get someone to replace me. I laid it all on the line. I actually told him exactly why I was leaving. I was brutally honest. And he ended up coming back to me, I think a couple of days later. Again, he's one of those people that processes things, that he needs time to think about it. And he just sort of said, look, you know, what about if we do this, 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 and this? Will that work? So we came to an agreement and I stayed, which at that point, I think my mind shifted. I was like, okay, this is not a forever job. It's going to suit my purposes for now. I'll do the job to the best of my ability, but it's never going to be the be all and end all anymore. So I'm no longer going to work those 60, 70 hours and give it all. I did that for a couple of years and then COVID hit and I wanted to return to study just for the love of learning something new. I think you get so caught up in life sometimes that you forget that you don't have to do something to have an outcome. You can literally just do it to learn something new. So when Monash Uni brought out their gender, peace and security grad cert online for the first time, I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. That was amazing. And it really opens your eyes to a whole different world of policy and organisations and NGOs and politics applying a gender lens to it through every step of the organisation or every part of life and just the people that you get exposed to. Academia are very different to corporate. Then transferred to a Master of International Relations specialising in gender and international development, a far cry from accounting and investment and governance and the like. I think about a year after that, my husband did have a bit of a health issue. He actually said to me, why don't you just quit, throw it all in, start something of your own, because he knew how unhappy I was at my job. I had been trying to find a new job, but I couldn't find anything that I liked because it was all the same thing. And, you know, the grass is not always green on the other side. I thought, you know what, I can do this on my own. I can start something that aligns with my values at my core and using my commercial skills. It's a work in progress, but I knew I could do something different that was going to have an impact even in my little end of the world. Because look, I don't have kids. I don't have that tangible legacy. So it was like, what can I do that does have a lasting impact on 1, 2, 3, how many people? So that's how Volta was born.
I love that. I think it's so interesting that you bring up legacy. It's something I've mentioned this on many a podcast before with my partner having his own life change and deciding to go back to school as a mature age student and study to become a psychologist. For a while there, we were talking about developmental psychology as he was going through those studies. And he talked to me a little bit about the concept of legacy and when and how that tends to play a role in your development, in your psychological development and the things that you crave. Now, I am also a woman who is child-free. I do not use the term childless. I am child-free. And so I too consider inadvertently through that my legacy on the world. You don't often put that term to it. You don't often put that concept to it, but it is something that plays in your mind when you just start to think about life generally and think, what am I putting out? What value am I putting out? What am I leaving? What will I think about on my last days, my last moment? And what am I doing? I think it's really interesting that you bring that up in context to what you've created in your business and what you'll go on to create, because I think in many, many ways, it's just so incredibly important. And it's so possible that that can be enough of a reason. Do you know what? I really want to do something very cool. I want to do something that matters to me. I want to do something that supports other people. And for that to come from, you know, what is my legacy on this world? It's a really interesting place. You know, it's not a fully thought out piece of advice for anybody else, but it's actually a thought process I've gone through myself a couple of times. I think we go through that legacy developmental stage a few times in our life, whenever we need it. We're like, okay, now what is it? Now what is it? Now what is it? But I think that's really interesting. And I can start to see the threads in your background and in your thinking there that are leading you into this space. There's also another element of your studies there that just before we move on, I'd love it if you could describe just in like 25 words or less, don't have to count it. That's just my radio promotions days coming back out. But what that degree was or what that study was that you did, because that sounds absolutely fascinating.
It's basically just looking at the world and how we interact both on a local, national, transnational level, and how if you apply a gender perspective over all of that, how it can change and how you can look at the different nuances and the impact that you can have, because women are often left behind. I've done a lot of research on peacekeeping, for example, and there's just some amazing things that come out and the impact women can have, but they're just not utilised because they're not seen as important or as part of the solution. But the outcomes are so much better if you do incorporate the gender lens over any decision making.
Wow to Monash University. That is a fantastic area of study. I'm so happy to hear that there's more research and more study going into that space. Just absolutely fascinating. Were you balancing that study with your same job at that time?
Yes. So I had negotiated down to a 4-day work week. So I did have that extra day that I said to myself was supposed to be called a Narelle day. So it was a day that I could do anything with. I could sit on the couch and watch Netflix all day, or I could do some study. That was the whole idea behind it. So managing the study and work wasn't so bad. I did my entire undergrad while I was working full time back in the day as well. So I'm no stranger, because I did that as a career age student as well. I didn't return to study until I was 30.
I love that. You can just study at any time, can't you? It's so great with open universities, but also just with all the, major unis being online now. It's so exciting. You can access that at any stage.
Yeah, I look back now and look, obviously life teaches you things and you get the benefit of life experience. But I can't imagine being a 17 or 18-year-old these days and having to choose what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, because you shouldn't have to. And there's so many possibilities out there that you don't actually need to have it sorted by that age. I don't even have it sorted now. So can you imagine asking a 17 or 18-year-old, what do you want to go and do for the next 30, 40 years of your life?
Absolutely not. I'll get the statistic horribly wrong, but I think it's something like the working generation of today has 16 jobs and 8 careers. What I would commit to doing is finding the actual statistic, because it is real, and I'll put it in the show notes. But it's, compared to what it was, we look now more like our careers are in volumes instead of just chapters. And, I've been a different person 3 times over the last 2 years, let alone all the years that are preceding that. I think it is just so wonderful doing that. Was it through your study that this business idea started to form, or did that come later?
I think at the end of that first grad cert in the gender, peace and security, because I absolutely loved the units that I took and everything I was learning. When I did start the master's, that's when I thought to myself, you know what, I'm never going to go and be a peacekeeper. My time has left. I'm never going to work for the UN as a human rights defender or a lawyer or anything like that, because the reality is I'm 40 plus. They just don't cater to those ages. But I must be able to use the knowledge that I've gained and the passion that I've got for gender equity by somehow incorporating it in with my commercial skills. And that's where it kind of came from. I thought, what can I do? I'm just going to create something new for myself that I haven't seen out there.
What were the first few steps that you took in creating this business?
I created a budget.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's on brand.
There's the accountant coming out in me, because we were also in the middle of building a house. Not the greatest of times to quit your job, and especially with the current climate of building shortages for suppliers and labourers, the whole thing. We're still going. We're still not in the house. So I set a budget to work out, look, how much do we need to live, incorporate everything about it. And then I sort of set about going, okay, what would the business look like? What could I offer? And that was a mix between getting the services that I knew that I wanted to really offer people to have that impact and have that change, but weighing that up against the services that I knew I could offer and get cash through the door. Because the reality is I still have to live. So I tried to get that balance right. I ran my numbers. I drafted a plan, and then I used my long service leave to get that all sorted, got back from long service and pulled the plug. I went, okay, you've now got 3.5 months notice to find someone else and do a proper handover.
How did that feel?
Really good, actually. It's like a whole weight just get lifted off your shoulders. It probably sounds really cliche, but again, you build it up in your mind. You're trying to preempt how someone's going to react to it. He took it fairly well, but also said a few things that he probably shouldn't have. And those just cemented why I was leaving.
And it's so challenging. I don't
hear it often, and perhaps it's because I attract humans that are as disorganized in the most positive of ways as I am, but those who tend to just kind of go through the motions and let the plan reveal itself. So I always really enjoy speaking, connecting, and learning from somebody who goes with the plan in mind first. And I love the way that you've done it in terms of working out what you need to live versus what you want to earn, or what do you want to charge, or what you want to do. I think that's a really interesting and unique way to do it. What I'm really interested in, I guess, is how far you took the plan at that stage. Did you have everything worked out, your offering, your pricing, your billing structures, your contracts, your website, all of those fun things as well at that stage? Or how did that roll out for you?
I did actually have a lot of that done. So a few years ago, I'd also dabbled in some side hustles. I'd had a gift box business. That was a bit random. That was to feed my creative and artistic side. And I did kind of start an advisory business as well. But all of that was done in that whole 8 hours I had spare a week. They came back to me what I did in those times, what did work and what didn't work. And I kind of knew this time I didn't have a never-ending budget, but I made sure that I got the things ticked off that I knew were going to be imperative. So I knew I had to have a website. And so I made sure that I had funds allocated to that. I'm very big on pricing things. There's that thing in the back of my mind, where women do have issues with working out their value. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely feel that and experience that myself, where you do question your value and what you're charging. Oh my God, will people actually engage me? Will they buy this? And coming from the background that I had, I knew how important it was to actually have your contracts in place. And I really wanted to limit my exposure on the billing side of things. So I worked out a plan that was acceptable to minimise my risk. Again, that's using, I suppose, all those tools that I'd accumulated over the past 14 years of mitigating the risk that were coming into play at that point.
Tell me about finding your first client. How did you find them and how did it go?
I found her on Facebook. Yeah, she was a new startup as well. And literally, we found out she lived 3 streets away from me. She was in the STEM area, which everything about what she was doing was about the environment and that sort of thing. And she was the older demographic as well, which is not unusual for small business owners to be in startup phase now. So everything just kind of aligned that I was able to help her get started with her accounts, making sure she was trying to be financially viable. I think we were together probably about 6 or 7 months until she realised she may have to go back and work for someone else. But what she did do was cement the type of person I want to work with and the type of values that sit behind it, because she was environment focused. There's not many women in STEM, and she was educating basically the future on biobarcoding of animals and plants to extract their data, to study them and understand how the ecosystem is impacted by all these different elements. It's teaching kids in high school about it.
I mean, that is very interesting. And you're absolutely right in terms of the statistics that are coming out now of the age of successful founders in startups is growing. So I think we have always had this picture of the startups and the founders who are creating these big businesses are, sub 30, sub 20, in some instances are these kind of kids that come up with this crazy energy that work, 18 hours a day, and they're the ones that go on to be really successful. But the statistics have definitely shifted in that it's the 40 plus area and even beyond that who are finding major success in founding these companies and these startups. So I think that just needs far more energy behind it, the encouragement of age and gender. No matter whatever picture you have in your mind of what a successful person looks like, is just to put it in the bin, because you can do it at any age. So I think it's a really great point that you raised there. And often the client we want does tend to show themselves, doesn't it? Even if you can't quite put your finger on it in the first instance, the experience or the service or whatever it is kind of reveals itself once you get started. So it's great that you had that experience. Where did you go from there?
From there, I've just been consistently trying to attract clients. I'm not a salesperson. Nothing I have done in my history has ever required me realistically to market or sell myself. I'm sure salespeople may disagree that everyone has to sell themselves at some point, but I wasn't really actively out there doing that. So that's been a rude shock. And the thought of sales actually makes my skin crawl. And even just putting yourself out there, like on podcasts, my copywriter, who is a friend who I'd met a couple of years ago at my very first networking event when I was doing the gift boxes, she had just started her business as well. And we've been friends ever since. She kept saying to me, you can't hide behind your business. You can't hide behind the name. Please don't pick your name and choose a different thing and not use your name because you want to hide. If you want to use it, that's fine, but don't avoid using your personal name because you want to hide behind something else. So she's always been in my ear about getting out there. You are the business. So just trying to go out and network, just to learn how to speak to people from different backgrounds. And when you work at a place for so long, it's almost like you're in a little bubble and you're used to dealing with a certain amount of people. And when you work with higher net worth individuals and you deal with external people, you just say their name and they say, how high should I jump? That is the reality of it. I'm not saying it's right, but I've noticed that's a bit of a difference sometimes. It's a bit of a harder slog when you don't have that brand sitting behind you to get things done sometimes. That's what I've been doing, really. I think it's just been how to reinvent myself away from that role into something that I'm proud of, that aligns with my values and my view of the future.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to the pain that comes with marketing and selling ourselves. It never feels particularly comfortable in any format. So yes, I completely relate to that. And I'm very glad that you took a step to reach out and connect with me to be on this podcast, because it's never easy. As I was saying off air, putting your story out there is terrifying and you don't get any better at it until you do it. And when you do it, it's oh, you're like, oh, okay, that's actually kind of fun. So yeah, the more we can put ourselves out there, we should. But I'm interested, you mentioned names. Where did Volta Consulting come from then?
Volta in Italian means change, and also in poetry, it's a change in argument or a change of way of thinking. And that, to me, is the whole premise of Volta and business. We need to change the way how we normally do business. It can no longer be about purely capitalism and making money to the detriment of other people. We need to flip the thinking, saying, well, what positive impact can I have while still making, obviously I need to make some money for myself, but can I have that positive impact on other people at the same time?
That is a content strategy right there in terms of sharing. And if you need one for your social media, it's a great story there with many a post and many captions that I can see coming out of there. So that's really interesting. How do you manage your time working on the business? So to find new clients, to grow yourself, to promote yourself, and working with the clients themselves?
I'm actually fairly relaxed at the moment. I'm not working full time. And I don't have so many clients coming in that I'm running ragged around everything. I've learned to work when I feel motivated. I'm an early bird, so I will get up. I'll probably be at my computer at 6:30 in the morning, which helps when you're dealing with East Coast people. But then I will take a break, maybe around 10 o'clock. And, some days the struggle is real. I just go, you know what? I actually don't have the motivation to do anything today. If I have due dates for things, with accounting comes compliance, or you've made dates that you promise clients things, then, you'll try and do the work. But I don't want to give them something that's not good enough just to meet a deadline, to be honest. So I will sometimes go to them and say, look, I need a little bit more time. Things haven't been working the way that I wanted so far. So I've kind of allowed myself to do that. If I feel like having a nap in the afternoon, I'll go have a nap with my cat. I think you sort of learn to go with when you're motivated and when you're not. And that may not always be the case, and I may not always have that luxury, but I feel like I'm also still recovering from my corporate role, to be honest. So I'm trying to be nice to myself.
Yeah, it does take quite a long time, I think, to recover from that more industrialized way of working. So in the firm, the 9 to 5, and I know most people who work for others in a corporate environment don't stick to 9 to 5 as it is anyway, but that sort of you're on during the day and then your time is outside of the work hours. It does take a while to recover from, because it isn't natural if we look at just from an evolutionary perspective, but I'm sure you've seen this in your studies as well, in how our cyclical natures are as women. We don't necessarily operate in that way either. Our energies are different at different times of the day, and I just love that you're reconnecting with that part of yourself. And I love an afternoon nap. Do you know what's so fun? I always want one. And then I lay down and I'm like, oh, but what about that new episode? Or I could just use this time to read a little bit of this, self-growth book or this business book and say, oh, for God's sakes, just actually relax and have the goddamn nap. So I love that you're actually doing that. Now, tell me about some of the wins that you've had so far. So this is quite a new vision. Like you say, I haven't seen a lot of this sort of offering on the market in terms of both encouraging and supporting businesses to put their social footprint first over profit. So I think it's really exciting. I'd love to know some of the wins you've had so far.
Most of the wins may be more personal based than business based. I mean, I think the win of leaving corporate and actually jumping into your own business, to me, that's a big one. The next one actually probably would be when I started paying myself a wage. I had that all sort of planned out when I would start. I always made a contribution to super from day one because that kind of thing is important to me. You get into a routine of at least paying something. But when I drew my first wage, I was like, oh, this is good. I've got some traction. And I just think the people that I've met along the way and just expanding the network, that not everyone is from that corporate background. And you just realize how different people are and the different perspectives and ways of thinking that are out there. I find it really inspiring. Again, it sounds like a cliche, but when you're isolated in a bubble, you're reinforced with these norms on a consistent basis. When you actually branch out and see what else is out there, you go, wow, there is actually a whole other world out there that is challenging. They are leading social purpose, and actually you're not on your own.
Fantastic. And inadvertent, excellent piece of advice about superannuation. That is very important. It's very easy to forget that. It might be a note that I write down for myself. Yes, let's not forget about that. It's going to come up at some point. I'm going to need that. So yes, great advice there to put a little bit aside of that and get it into a routine. How have you changed personally through this process of creating your business?
Look, I still have quite a few bad habits from my corporate role. I can tend to definitely lose the plot quite easily. I do get quite anxious over things, but I think I'm learning to not sweat the small stuff, that it's okay when things don't go to plan, that it's not the end of the world. And I think that I'm just allowing my brain to be a little bit more creative. I've always had that left versus right brain battle. I can be very analytical, but I also love my artistic side. So I'm definitely trying to get back to more of that. I think I'm slightly happier than I was in my other place. You'll have to ask my husband that.
How do you nurture your creative side?
I enjoy writing. I love to read. I love reading romantic military novels. I just, Kindle, you can just go into this whole other world, no brainer, and you go, oh, this is great. And quite often I'll disappear for hours at a time, which infuriates my husband because he's like, you just get your head in a book and then nothing else exists in your world. I was like, yeah, I know, it's a good book.
Kindle is just my favorite thing on the planet. I love a good hard copy book. I love the way it feels. I love the way it smells. I love when they're around you in the house. But there is nothing like just being able to go, I need a good read. Let me just scroll here, download. Great, I'm into it. And being able to do that anywhere. Kindle, if you are listening, please sponsor my podcast immediately. But also, what a niche. Romantic military specific. That's quite a niche down.
Yes, it is. I just love them. There's a lot of American authors that do focus on that because obviously the military is quite a big influence over there. And sometimes I sit there and go, oh my God, Narelle, you do gender studies and you're a feminist and you're reading this junk. But I'm just like, you know what? I think that's the whole point, is just to go whatever tickles your fancy.
I so agree with that. We don't have to identify with anything. We have a set of values and we know what we like, we know how we operate. Doesn't mean you have to identify, as a feminist in the way that you can't enjoy that sort of reading as well. We can't have the light without the dark. We can't have the past, with the present without the future. All of those sayings, we can be all of those things at once and it's perfectly fine. So yes, I love that. I might just download a little romantic military novel myself just to see what this hype is about. It's a genre I haven't engaged in before. I mean, I love a good bio in particular. It's very nerdy, but I just really love personal growth and personal development books and stories and philosophies from years ago. And I just get hung up in like the silly, Jodie Picoults and, those sorts of novels that just take you in a bit of a journey. Like, I know how this is going to end, but I'm okay with it. So I'm right there with you. What do you wish you knew before you jumped 2 feet in?
That not everything goes to plan. You can have everything laid out and with the best intention, but shit happens and life just occurs and there's nothing you can do, I think, to control that. And you just at some point have to just go with the flow in regards to what does happen. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's never going to be the way that you think it will be, because you go through all these like roads, people pop up, something will happen, which will send you in another direction. But I think that's probably the point being in business in the first 5 years, until you really work out what it is that you want to do and where you want to be and who you want to work with. You just need to accept it and roll with those punches along the way.
I agree. The first iteration is never going to be the last. And I think we get so hung up on that, having the core idea, having it set, having it ready to go, and then halfway through going, hang on a minute, it might be a little bit more like this, and fighting the pivot a little bit. But you just got to start with something, anything, and just let it reveal itself. I think that's excellent advice. Networking, such an important aspect, all of that community support, the people you meet, the support that you get from that, just so painful sometimes, but so important. And it leads me to my final question is, you've connected with the community today, with me, with the wonderful listener, with the entire community behind Unemployed and Afraid, and sharing your story is just such a gift to give. So in return, how can the listener and I support you on your journey as you go through to these next stages?
I just want everyone, be it personally or be it in business, to think about what they're doing and the impact they have. Probably one of my favourite quotes that I've heard of late is by Dr. Jodie York, who said, every time we open our wallets, it's an opportunity to see the world how we want to view it. So I think that's what it is, to start think about what you're doing next and how maybe you can just change and make a better decision that has a better impact on somebody and not just yourself.
Yes, I think that is a wonderful message. There is nothing more powerful to vote with, apart from our vote, very important, but then our dollar and where we spend our money. So I think that is an excellent place to leave it on. And I will, of course, because I love that even at the end of this podcast, you're like, I'm not going to promote myself. I'm going to promote you for you. I will make sure to put your website, any of your social links, LinkedIn, however you'd like to communicate. I will put all of those links in the show notes that the listener can go and check out your amazing work, can start to consider their own social impact. I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you have a business, want a business, and or are deep in your second, third, fourth, fifth, 12th business at this stage. So social impact should be something that's on your mind in some way, shape or form. And I hope that the listener will reach out to you, Narelle, and get a little bit of advice on that. Thank you for the work that you're putting out to the world. I'm grateful that you're doing it. And I'm very grateful that you shared your story with me today.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Kim. Likewise, I'm grateful you're letting me share the message.
One quick thing, if you're hearing this, you've listened all the way through. Hopefully that means you really like this podcast, because it's pretty generous to give up 40 odd minutes of your time for it. If that is the case, please leave the show a star rating and a review. It helps me reach so many more people who might also listen all the way through and get some benefit and some support out of it. Not to mention, it puts a real spring in my step to read them.
Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the stories of starting over with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you love it, you can say thanks with a star rating and a review, and of course, join the community on Instagram and LinkedIn. Find us at Unemployed and Afraid. See you there.